Welcome back, Chris. I am so happy to be crammed in my closet with you for new episodes.
I couldn't be happier myself.
It has been so long. And while you and I have obviously been talking back and forth and hanging out a lot in the interim, our listeners may not know all the things that have been going on in the past year. And one of the big life changes that I was thinking about that you'd have in the past year is you have some new members of your household.
I do.
Yes.
Live with my mother-in-law and my grandmother-in-law right now.
Right.
Which has been great. My grandmother-in-law is 100 years old.
Yes.
So that's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
And one thing I was thinking about is how, at this point, your house has a surplus of grandmas, an abundance of grandmas.
Abundance. Yeah.
Yes. And this really has me asking the question, why? Not like, why did they move in with you? Why did you allow them to build onto the side of your house? But why do they exist?
Grandmas?
Yeah, grandmas. And I'm not the first person to question the existence of grandmas.
Okay.
Sorry, grandmas, that I'm kind of calling you out here. But this is, of course, the hotly debated grandmother hypothesis. If you really want to oversimplify things a lot, the primary goal of humanity is just to survive. And one of the ways that we survive is that, women give birth to children. And I'm just saying from an evolutionary perspective on this. But if this is true, then why do women go through menopause and become unable to have children for 40 plus years of their life? For Kirsten's grandma, even more than 40 years.
Yeah.
That would have been 50 to 60 years. So if they can live this long and not be able to give birth to a child, then they must serve some other purpose than this. And the grandmother hypothesis states that giving birth takes a lot of energy. I've never given birth before, but I guarantee you it takes a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And just as women age, this is not maybe the most effective use of energy. So instead, they go through menopause and devote the energy towards helping their children raise more children. So back in the hunter-gatherer days, the idea is that they don't have to worry about attracting a new mate or finding a partner. You can just focus on finding all the good berries. And you've been finding berries for so long in your life, you know where all the good ones are.
Right.
So you're able to help in kind of additional ways. You're providing education for other family members and people in your community, or just in the modern day, giving all the moms a free afternoon. And I'm sure you get plenty of that from,
Yes. It's been very nice.
Yes. So this ensures survival of the species by essentially increasing the chances that grandchildren will survive into adulthood and then themselves have more children. And in some ways, some of the genetics from those grandmas is still being passed down to the grandchildren and beyond. So there is an incentive for them to care about their grandchildren. And this all pretty much made sense to me when I was learning about this recently, but there are a few problems with the grandmother hypothesis. One of them, which is maybe less important, is, at least in the US and Chile, children who are partially raised by their grandparents were more likely to be obese and therefore lower their chances of survival.
Interesting.
And that's basically the scientific way of saying they bake too many cookies.
Yeah, I was going to say, from my personal experience, I grew up with both sets of my grandparents. So I got to see them a lot. If I would have only eaten the food my grandparents cooked for me, I would have been much bigger.
Right.
That's true, for sure. They use a lot more butter and lard and stuff.
Yes. And there are maybe some more significant criticisms of the grandmother hypothesis, though. I will admit I kind of cherry-picked that one mostly just to make the cookies joke.
Right, and it's good. Yeah.
Right. But for grandmas to be an evolutionary advantage, they essentially need to be rare among other species. Because if this isn't your secret weapon, everyone would be doing it, and it wouldn't be the advantage that helps you survive better. And while whales and elephants, as far as we know, are the only other types of mammals that go through menopause in addition to humans, many other mammals go through what's called oopause, which is a kind of a similar concept in the grand scheme of things. I'm not going to get into it, but just know that they're doing a similar thing where they can't ovulate and can't have more children after a certain time. But the challenge is that most animals that could theoretically become a grandma, they get killed before they ever get to be a grandma.
Sure, right.
But now that we have enough animals in zoos and we have grants to study them and they're in captivity, they're getting treated well, we're now starting to see animals that do not go through menopause, but do become old enough to be grandmas, which really kind of is a pretty big argument against the grandmother hypothesis. And, this means that maybe grandmas might not be our secret weapon, but just kind of a weird oddity in nature. So the next time that you're at a family gathering and your grandma asks you, why aren't you married yet? When are you going to give me some grandchildren or great-grandchildren? Know that there's at least a chance that she just can't help it. That this might just be her instinct that ensures the survival of our species.
Welcome to the Factoid Podcast. You didn't ask for it, but we're going to tell you about it anyway. My name's Chris Humphreys.
And I'm Payton Gessel.
So, Payton, one of my favorite things to do growing up when we went on family vacations, I don't know if maybe I've talked about it before, but we didn't do a lot of like crazy traveling. We basically stayed throughout the Midwest. We didn't do anything super crazy, but we did often on our trips, as people who travel in the Midwest do, I think, we went to some caves, to caverns, right? And these things are like everywhere. You see like billboards as you're driving that say blah 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 caverns, and they're kind of, I think there's almost these local ones, and anyway,
Yes.
We went to those, right? And not all of them, but we went. I can remember many times where we ended up going to some type of cave tour, and they're basically like just caves that have been converted into tourist attractions. I'm sure you've been.
Yeah, I think at some point in my life I have. My friend Alex used to work at one in Ohio.
Okay.
Well, the Ohio Caverns, which
Okay.
is, I mean, kind of close to you, maybe a little bit farther west. But
Sure. I've never been to that one specifically. But again, we would travel around mostly just Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, whatever, Indiana, that kind of area.
Right.
And we would go to those. And I've always kind of been fascinated with them because I can't explain why, but when I'm like in nature, but also protected from the elements of nature, I'm just fascinated by it. Like even like an umbrella is like the simplest form of that, where you just like are being protected from the rain by this piece of cloth, right?
Right.
So like a cave is just like exponentially greater in every way, right? Because you're outside, but you're inside. And like there's no lights, but like one tiny light goes a super long way. It's very cool, right?
Right.
And no matter how hot it is outside or how cold it is outside, it can be freezing cold 0 degrees, or it can be 100 degrees outside. It's like 58 degrees in a cave, like roughly, depending on how deep you are, right? It's the temperature is the same all the time.
I think maybe you're a caveman is what I'm finding out.
I'm a caveman. I think I am. It's just very interesting to me. It's always fascinated me. I don't think I'm alone, because obviously people go to these places, right? But I've just kind of been fascinated. And one year, actually, Kirsten and I, we went on vacation with one of our friends who lived near us in Colorado. And Kirsten and I wanted to go on a road trip to the beach. And he really wanted to go on a road trip to Mammoth Caves. And we thought, let's just do a big road trip. We'll do them both. To be honest, I didn't have that much of a desire to go to Mammoth Caves.
Yeah.
I thought, I've been to caves. I've seen caves. But he wanted to go, and it was like not on the way, but we were going that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we went to Mammoth Caves, and I'm not going to lie to you, it was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Like, it's incredible.
Is it okay? Dumb question. Are they called Mammoth Caves because they are very large?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know.
It's the largest cave system, I think, in maybe in the world, maybe in America. I don't remember the statistics about it, but it's like a huge cave system.
I didn't know if like a woolly mammoth fell in there and died. And that was
Not
why.
that I know of. I think it's called Mammoth because of the size.
Sure.
But like, it's incredible. And like the tours that you can do, it's one of the only national parks that once you're in, you got to pay for more stuff. Like like, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like
Yes.
you pay for every tour. You don't
Mm-hmm.
just pay and then get to do it all, which is
Right.
sad. It's expensive, but it's so cool. And like, it's just by far the coolest cave I've ever been in. So if you ever get a chance to go to Mammoth Caves, definitely go. One of the coolest things I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think whenever I like to buy a lot of like national park calendars that will hang on the wall, but they never do any paintings of Mammoth Cave, probably just because it would be like a dark hole.
Yeah, just a dark hole.
It doesn't really look nice compared to like Yellowstone.
It does have real cool, the stalactites and stalag.
I'm not saying that's not cool. I
Right.
think when you're trying to like paint it on
True.
a calendar, it's
Can't
hard
really
to...
be. You cannot understand its beauty from a picture in a calendar.
Yep.
I'll say that for sure. But maybe you should go and get a calendar from there, and it'll just be pictures. Of it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you could even put it in your other calendars. Change the February. To
I could
a
put it
cave,
in my man cave. Yes.
That's right. That's right. And so I've always been fascinated with caves. And I'm going to switch gears here because I was thinking about another thing that's always fascinated me. And I'm going to start it out with a story. When I went to prom only 2 times, my freshman year and then my senior year. It's not a thing. It's just not a thing I care too much about. But I got asked freshman year, and I went, and it was fun. But one thing that happened to me at prom was my freshman year was we always had after prom, right? So which is like this party where you stay up all night, and then the next day we would go to an amusement park. That's what my school did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to prom, had a blast, but at after prom, I got sick and had to have my mom come and get me, which is that's not what you want when you're in high school at after prom, right? And the reason I got sick was because I got super constipated because I ate so many cheese cubes at prom. And I love cheese. I don't think I'm alone here, but another thing that fascinates me almost as much as being protected by the elements by some sort of thing is cheese. And it's all kinds of cheese. But specifically that night, it was pepper jack and cheddar. I basically stood there. There was a Coke machine, like a dispenser, a fountain, and then there was cheese cubes. And that's where I hung out most of the night, if we're being honest.
Where was your date?
Well, I think we did dance, but not much. I was mostly eating cheese cubes.
Right. She tries to hold your hand and she's like, ugh.
What is all that? That's cheese is what that is. Something I've always loved. And I think not everyone, but most people do. I understand there are reasons that you might not. Lactose intolerance, say, dairy allergies, whatever. But cheese is something that I've always loved, whether it's Velveeta that you make a dip out of or put in some soup, or it's a nice sharp cheddar slice on a saltine cracker. That's one of my favorite ways to consume cheese.
Yeah.
I love cheese. It's always been something that I've been fascinated with.
I've been trying to improve my cheese skills in the last few years. For my 30th birthday party, Amy organized all of our friends to bring a little wedge of cheese, and we stuck them together and made a cheesecake. And the goal was
so
that
fun.
I could get a small sampling of several different types of cheese and kind of get to start to grow my palate, I guess.
Your cheese palate.
Yes, and it has been getting better. Like I had a sandwich today that had some brie on it. I've been really getting into like kind of those like soft kind of cheeses like that, and really enjoying. I've got a long ways to go though. I don't do anything that's like super moldy yet, but I've done some that have like ashes in the middle.
Okay,
so
interesting.
I'm trying to continue this, so I'm excited to see where you're going.
That's the thing. Like with cheese, you almost have to adjust to where you enjoy some funk, because all the good cheeses have some kind of funk, whether it's just like an aged cheese or there's something in it. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's just how it works. In fact, I was just talking to you about it earlier. Kirsten and I spent some time in Amish country, which if you're not from Ohio, that's something that people do around here, and something you find in Amish country on every corner is a cheese shop. And so we obviously went into a cheese shop, and it's just the reason it's such a successful store is because everyone loves cheese. And I'll tell you, it wasn't until recently that I realized that my love for caves and my love for cheese go together. They can go together. I don't know a lot about history, so I am willing to admit that maybe a lot more people know about this than I do. But there's something that combines my interest with both cheese and caves. But it also introduced me, when I found out about this, it introduced me to the problem of government intervention in the marketplace that has apparently plagued not only America, but other countries as well. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about yet, it's government cheese.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. I'm sure you've heard the saying, I got to get that cheddar. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This came from government cheese.
What?
Did you know that?
I did not know that.
So I didn't either. Because like I'm saying, I've heard people talk about, quote, government cheese. And it's usually like, it's like a saying that people use. Same thing with, I got to get the cheddar. It's like a money thing. It's all related to money. And here's the thing. It's because in the 80s, 70s, I think it started in the 70s, but 70s and 80s, mid 70s, basically, here's what happened. For all of you who don't know, a lot of you probably do know. And in fact, I talked to a dairy farmer about this today. The government decided they needed to inflate the price of milk, which sounds simple. It seems like the government should just be able to say, milk costs this much. It's not how it works because it's like free market or whatever, right? So they decided, in order for us to do that, there's two ways we can do that. First way is we can lessen the amount of milk that we produce, right? We can tell people, hey, stop making so much milk. But then the route that they took, which it is the more American way, as I think about it, is let's just make more, but also buy more of it. Okay. And so the government decided, I will buy as much cheese as you will give me at this price. And so that made milk producers say, hey, it turns out, or it made even people who didn't maybe necessarily have a dairy farm say, maybe I should start a dairy farm because the government is guaranteeing they will buy as much of this as I can possibly give them at this price. And that was a good price. And so they were able to both raise supply and raise demand, because even if the demand was their demand, it's still demand, right?
Right, yeah.
And so Jimmy Carter did this in the 70s. And that's how it went. They started buying all this milk, which is great. It's good for the farm. However, I don't know if you've ever bought milk before. It goes bad pretty quickly. In the grand scheme of how food works, there's food that lasts a lot longer than milk. There's food and drink that lasts a lot longer than milk. I don't know if you've ever seen the expiration on a can of soda. A lot longer than a jug of milk. And so there's the problem of, hey, we have all this milk. Where do we put it? And what do we do with it?
Right.
Because even if you give every person a jug of milk every day who's on staff in some government building, it's still buying more than that, okay? Because they're buying, I'm telling you right now, lots and lots of milk. Like, not just like a lot of milk, like the too much milk, okay? And so, but they're doing it for the good of the market, right? And this is what makes sense. And they keep doing it. However, they realize soon it's too logistically complicated for us to not only buy this milk, but then use this milk. We can't just be wasting it. And so we have to do something. And so they decided, you know what is also going to boost the demand of milk and the price of milk is if we decide to buy more cheese. And so they decided, let's shift this farther down the supply chain to cheese because cheese lasts a lot longer than milk. And it can be made to last a lot longer than milk.
Right.
And so the government decided to say, hey, look, we'll buy as much of the cheese as you have at this price as possible. They switched the whole thing to cheese, right? And if they didn't implement certain things, you would think that cheese companies or cheese producers would just give them the crappiest cheese, which I think is what would have happened. There's people who worked for the government who were just cheese graters, not like graters, but like grated the cheese to make sure that what they were getting wasn't just the crap. They needed it to be the good stuff, right? And so there are companies that made solely cheese for the government, like they just made government cheese, the stuff that the government was going to buy, right? Again, there was no plan for the cheese. They just knew it would last longer. They had to figure out what to do with it. And I don't know if you've ever tried to move heavy things, just as a person trying to move a heavy thing, not easy. When you're trying to move literally billions of pounds of cheese, billions with a B pounds of cheese,
wow,
logistically, it's not easy to do. It's expensive. Even if you go and dump it in a hole, it's expensive to do because it's so much cheese. And so they didn't know what to do. And here's the thing, Jimmy Carter, he's leaving, and Ronald Reagan's coming in. And Ronald Reagan, as he campaigns, one of his campaign promises, one of his campaign ideas was, we're going to cut government spending so we can have more money, right? And so everyone knew the government had tons of cheese. And cheese sort of became this, the government's wasting all this money on literally billions of pounds of cheese. They were at one point buying 25% of all the cheese anyone ever bought. The government was buying
That's crazy.
I know. And so they decided, what can we do with this? What are we... So... Have you ever tried to store 1 billion pounds of cheese?
No,
me neither.
I could barely store like the
cheesecake,
the 3 to 4 pounds of the cheesecake. Yeah,
every warehouse that had temperature control in all of America was filled with mostly cheese at one point, and then it became so much more than that. They thought, what should we do with the rest of the cheese that we don't have room for? So this is where the caves come in. They started storing it in caves because there's like these caves that they realized, you don't have to do much to temperature control a cave. It's always the same.
Right.
And it's a perfect temperature for stuff like cheese. And so they just stored, like, in these caves in Missouri and Kentucky. We're talking, like, a space in a cave. I think the stat I read was, like, the size of, like, 300 football fields or something. Something crazy.
Yes,
like a very large room in a cave.
A very American measurement, too.
Yes, very American. They had cheese on cheese stored in there. And so they just are storing this cheese, trying to figure out what to do with it. And Ronald Reagan says, you know what, we got to cut spending. So he decided, I'm going to just give out the cheese to elderly people who qualify and also just someone who's like people on food assistance. Mm-hmm. And so for years and years, every month, any person on a food assistance program, which again was cut a lot by him because the government spending, but he decided we're going to cut funding, but we're going to boost it back up because we're giving all this cheese. He gave them cheese. And so like, there's like people whose childhoods, like the most nostalgic thing is having a grilled cheese sandwich made out of government cheese, which I think is so interesting.
Yeah. Do you know what kind of like notes that you would find on that kind of cheese? Like if you had to describe, I guess, to me and the listeners, what is your understanding of like what, can you compare it to another type of cheese maybe?
I think that it was, for the most part, their goal was like store it, like long-term storage. And so they would, but it was basically, from what I read, anything from like a mild cheddar to then also like a Velveeta block.
That's kind of what I was wondering.
And I think a majority of it was like Velveeta, basically just super processed to be able to last on the shelf as long as possible. Because then once it was in the cave long enough, they would freeze it eventually too, because they're not trying to get rid of it.
Because when I think about cheese in caves, my mind goes to things like a Roquefort or some sort of like a cave aged cheese.
Sure.
And those are all maybe a little bit more delicate, and they're
Right.
you know they're very funky.
Right.
Whereas it's this almost feels like the opposite kind of cheese that you would put into a cave.
Right.
But obviously for different.
Yeah, they're
reasons.
not keeping it. That's the thing, because they use caves now, like you said, to age cheeses and stuff. Like that's a place, because again, I think it's just like a very economical place to store something for a long time, where you don't have to pay for refrigeration services or like electric. It's just cooler in there.
Yep.
And so they did that. But yeah, I think it's from what I read, it's basically anywhere from a cheddar to a Velveeta, and like and anywhere in between. It's all like mild stuff that can just be around.
Right.
And so some people, if you like read stories or like hear people talk about the government cheese experiences they had like growing up, some people thought it was the best cheese in the whole world, and some people thought it was the worst cheese they've ever tasted, and they remember that taste and they could never get it out of their mouth. But the thing is, like, number one, people have opinions and different tastes, but number two, it was different cheese depending on where you got it and how long it, whatever, right? So it was, again, I think it was mostly Velveeta type cheese, but it could have been anything really. And the thing is, this type of thing I learned, I just assumed maybe this was like an American thing. It seems kind of like a silly idea. Like, I guess it works. It makes sense that they needed milk to be more expensive, so they made it more expensive. But then it's like, how can you, once you start something like that, it's very hard to stop, because you've got all these dairy farms that if you stop are going to just die.
Yes.
But it's also super expensive to just literally buy whatever they give you. So it's very hard to quit. But the thing is, like, even though we did it, we weren't the first people to do this. We weren't the first government to do this. In fact, there's a thing in Europe and the EU called Butter Mountain.
Yeah.
Same thing. Which like literally the same exact idea as like the whole milk production thing. Like the government decided, hey, same exact thing happened. And then they had all this butter. They had all this, it wasn't even just butter. It was like butter and, I don't remember, dry powdered milk or something. They had tons and tons of it, and then whatever, right? Same exact thing happened. Then they were able to get it all down, and then they did it. The same thing happened again. Like they've done it like multiple times. It's like valleys and peaks where like they just like, oh, we're gonna buy all the milk and blah blah. Same thing. And then there's one in France.
Yeah.
Called the Wine Lake. Have you heard of this? Yeah, that's the thing. I had never heard of it. And sadly, the Butter Mountain and the Wine Lake aren't literal mountains of butter or lakes filled with wine. I was kind of hoping it was literally like a big lake.
Yeah.
But like same thing with wine. I guess there was like a period of multiple years in like all of Europe where they were making 1.7 billion more bottles of wine than they sold in a year. So like, I mean, like for multiple years in a row.
Yeah.
So they literally had again, just like the logistics, even as a government of an entire country or continent, storing that much stuff takes up so much physical space, it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
So did you know, like, they did what was called emergency distillations and would like distill it into other things.
Oh, okay.
And during COVID, they turned it all into hand sanitizer. I thought that was like, again, very smart, but it's also like, can you explain to me why we had so much of that? Again, it's probably good, I guess, because they made it sanitizer out of it. I don't know. All I'm saying is there's probably a better way to do things. I'm not a politician. I also don't know the answer, but it did bring us a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, at least stuff that I was fascinated in. And there's like comedy routines just about government cheese still that people talk about, or you know, and how they loved it. And the punchline is something about the government cheese. But all I know is all types of cheese, whether it's Gruyere, Munster, pepper jack, or government, they all make a good grilled cheese.
During our year away from the podcast, I've been learning a lot more about geography. And I know this might sound a little bit boring and dull, and I understand it can be pretty dry, but there are plenty of people that like to make it a lot more fun. If you're into this sort of thing, I mostly watch Mapmen and Geography Now on YouTube. Those are some fun channels. And one of the weird topics that these channels and other channels that I've watched like to discuss is the concept of the micronation. These are typically like small autonomous regions and breakaway states of countries that have been occurring throughout history over time. And I've been following another guy on YouTube who created his own micronation last year. And there's this large Flatiron statue in Asheville, North Carolina, on like a little town square. And the region around that statue has been declared the sovereign state of Ireland by a guy named Christopher, who runs the YouTube channel Magnify. And I'd been watching him before all of his Ireland adventures, and it was interesting to see how his content changed for several months as he was getting his new micronation up and running. So, as you can imagine, creating micronations is obviously a pretty silly hobby for people that just like the pageantry and procedure of government, but maybe don't like all the bad things that happens with government, for real. For example, Ireland's government is run on a Discord server.
Nice.
And their first referendum had more votes than the last election in the country of Liechtenstein.
That's hilarious.
So they definitely have a lot of citizens. They also offered a very easy path to citizenship, which also kind of helps.
Sure.
Dual citizenship as well. And several months ago, Ireland attended MicroCon 2025, where this is a convention where they went and met with a bunch of other micronations with the goal of doing diplomacy together. And part of why they do this is to add legitimacy to their claims as sovereign states. So you see, according to the Montevideo Convention of 1933, there are certain rules that a nation has to meet in order to be considered a nation. There are 4 following requirements. They need to have a permanent population, a defined territory, a government of some form, and the capacity to enter relations with other states. And the last one is the hardest one, because you basically need as many nations as possible to recognize you for it to count. It's not like it's kind of a weird process, really. So, for example, the country of Kosovo, they've been trying for about 20 years to be recognized in general by enough of the world to count as a country. And not until recently, they just passed like half of the world's countries recently. And they've been allegedly independent for 20 years. So this is not any easy feat.
Sure.
And by comparison, Ireland has been trying to wear down Romania on TikTok because I think Romania's official TikTok account said that they would recognize Ireland as a country if the Magnify YouTube channel got enough subscribers.
Oh, nice.
So he runs a campaign to try to get more subscribers, and he gets the number, and Romania does nothing. So it's a lot easier just to go to MicroCon and get recognition from people who want to recognize you. You all mutually do this and say, hey, we did diplomacy with 40 different other nations this week. Then, yes, trying to go the traditional route that may be more legitimate. So now, Chris, I want to play a game with you.
Okay.
I'm going to name several micronations, and I need you to tell me if these are real micronations that existed throughout history or joke micronations that attended MicroCon 2025. So we've got 6 of them here. First up is the Republic of Molossia. So is that a real micronation or a joke micronation?
It's real.
That is a joke micronation. It is based out of Nevada.
Okay.
They've been going for about 30 years, though. So they
sounds like legitimate to me.
Absolutely. Next is the Republic of Alba. Republic of Alba.
It sounds good to me. I don't know.
Real or joke?
Real.
That one is real.
Good.
Yes.
That one sounds real.
Yeah, so that one, it was in Italy at one point, I forget, maybe a year, like 100 or 200 years ago, but they only lasted for 2 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then next up, one more republic here, the Republic of San Marino.
It's fake. It sounds too good.
It's real.
Oh, okay.
This is probably the realest one on this list.
It sounds real.
They compete in Eurovision even.
Okay.
Yes. So they are inside of Italy. It's like an enclave inside of Italy. A lot of interesting history with it, but they've been independent for a long time and just never got swallowed up by anyone else. So yes, real micronation. Next is the Grand Duchy of West Arctica.
I hope it's real.
It is a joke.
Okay, that one sounds like a joke.
Yeah, there's a portion of Antarctica that most major countries in the world signed a treaty that said no one's going to claim this. So some guy said, "Well, I'm just going to claim it."
That's funny.
The next one is the Kingdom of Australia, which I can't even say with a straight face.
That's not real.
That is not real.
Australia.
Yeah, and their land is kind of confusing. There's they claim some parts in the U.S. and some parts in Canada. It's not like a one contiguous region. It's kind of
Is that allowed?
I guess. I guess in theory you could have like a few enclaves and exclaves. I guess.
The U.S. has places that aren't touching us.
Right. This one is probably the most questionable on the list. Yes.
Australia. I mean, Australia.
Yeah, mostly saying it for the name.
Yeah.
And then the last one on the list is the Free State of Bottleneck. Real or joke?
I hope it's real. I can't imagine that it is.
The Free State of Bottleneck was a real historical
Oh,
micronation,
wow.
and that is what we're going to talk about today.
Okay.
Because about a month ago, I visited it.
No way. Bottleneck.
Yes. So at the end of World War I, all of the nations that were fighting signed the Armistice Agreement, and Germany was one of the losing countries in the war. So France, Belgium, the UK, and the US all agreed to occupy the western part of Germany, known kind of as the Rhineland region, until Germany could pay reparations for the war. And they're mostly occupying the area west of the Rhine River, but they also occupied a 30-kilometer radius around a few key cities east of the river. So the UK took over Cologne, and the US took the city of Koblenz, and the French took the city of Mainz. Now, the problem is that these 30-kilometer circles around Koblenz and Mainz nearly overlap, but there's this tiny little sliver between the two of them that sort of looks like the shape of a bottleneck.
Okay.
And the thousands of people who lived in that little sliver essentially became trapped, because to the west of them, they have the Rhine River and then occupied territory west of the river. To the north, they have the American occupied zone that they cannot enter. To the south, they have the French occupied zone that they can't enter. And to the east, they have a mountain range with no roads. So they are still part of Germany, but they were effectively cut off from the rest of their country. And while it sounds like this was some sort of like accident of someone just like drew wrong on the map, it sounds like enough of the high ups and all the militaries knew that this was a problem. And they just kind of said, like, they were told they need to sign this armistice agreement as fast as possible. Don't ask questions. Like, we'll figure it out later, was kind of the general sentiment. And the French assumed that they could probably just occupy this sliver region anyways, just like convince them that, hey, life would be better if you just joined us anyways. But instead, they were surprised because the locals resisted this. So in 1919, the people of this region declared themselves the Free State of Bottleneck, or Freistaat Flaschenhals in German, and they named the city of Lorsch as their capital, and Lorsch's mayor, Edmund Pnischek, became their first president.
Nice.
So life in the Bottleneck at the beginning was very bad, honestly. Like, this is right at the end of the war, so just in general, this region is not doing well. But unlike a lot of these micronations we talked about earlier, this was not just for fun. This was truly out of necessity and desperation.
Yeah.
So the region just didn't really have the infrastructure to survive on its own. Trains were not allowed to stop in the Bottleneck. So there would be trains that would start in the American region and travel through the German region. They couldn't stop at any of the stops and had to go straight to the French region. So now they have no train access. And since all the mail was being delivered by train, they now have no mail. And then the French cut all the telephone and telegraph lines going into that region. So now they have basically no communication methods that they were used to having at this point. They also couldn't hunt for animals because the Treaty of Versailles banned the citizens from owning guns. So now they can't hunt. And this region, it's very hilly, and they're basically known for only growing wine. Like agriculturally, they don't have much in the way of livestock, and they can't really grow a lot of normal crops. Their thing is they grow grapes for wine and sell the wine for other stuff. So they're just not very diverse in resources. And it kind of feels like every time I play Settlers of Catan, and I just have like, instead of having too many sheep and needing to trade for ore, they just had too much wine and they needed coal.
That's funny.
So,
I haven't played that game in a while, but that's a good one.
Yes.
That's good.
Absolutely. And to make matters worse, the Bottleneck wasn't formally recognized by any of its neighbors, and they wouldn't trade with them. So any trade that the people of the Bottleneck did was illegal and considered smuggling. So they shifted their entire economy to being smugglers in order to survive.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's so unfortunate for these people.
Yeah, exactly. They were just like an anomaly on a map that no one cared enough about to say, what about these guys?
It's like, it's not enough to cause enough of a fight, but it's like, these are people.
Right.
Here,
like the numbers kind of differ. I've heard between like 5 and 10,000 kind of were the people. So not a crazy amount, but also if you think about that is like enough.
Yeah, that's enough for sure. That's like 5-7 times the place I live.
Right,
exactly.
The
town I live in. That's crazy.
Yeah. So as they were getting into smuggling, they tried several different methods that I want to explain. The best case scenario that they could have was by ship. So while it was still illegal, ships could occasionally sneak into the bottleneck at night through the Rhine River. They would dock at the harbor and then trade with the members of the people of the bottleneck and then sneak out before the French could find them. So they would be like trying to flash lights like in the river at night and stuff to try to catch these boats.
Okay.
But like if you did it at the right time, you could get in, get out, and get a big supply drop. And one of the less fun methods when the ships weren't coming, though, was to drive a horse-drawn carriage through the mountains.
Ah.
And this was the only way to get to another city in the bottleneck. The closest city was Limburg that they would be able to trade at. And then they would. So imagine just like a bunch of bottles of wine on a bumpy road and a horse-drawn carriage as you're trying to take it to the city. You trade all of that for your food to eat and then coal to keep your house warm. And then you have to run this all back to the bottleneck.
Wow.
This takes like several days to do. All of the potential problems of, that come of traveling through a mountain are there. And on top of that, the exact border lines of the bottleneck are being frequently disputed by the French. So you might be going through an area that a few weeks ago you thought was part of the territory, and then you get there, and then there's French soldiers there standing with guns and saying, "Hey, you're trespassing."
Wow.
So like sometimes you couldn't even guarantee that your route was going to be the same every time. And one of the riskiest smuggling events that happened, though, was when the members of the bottleneck robbed a train.
Okay.
I guess in some ways they kind of hijacked it too. So they sneak into the French-occupied city of Rudesheim, which would have been like a few miles south. And they sneak there at night. They get into this train that's full of coal, and they steal it, and they drive it back into the bottleneck, where they take it back to the city of Lorsch and then just distribute all the coal to the citizens.
Okay.
So that way everyone has like plenty of, I don't know if this was in the winter, but the goal was that like
Right.
you're using this for cooking, you're using this for not
Heat.
freezing.
Right.
Because
Right.
it's not like it's not a super cold region, but it definitely is going to get cold in the winter.
Right. That sounds like the most effective one so far. Steal the train.
Yes. It was also one of the most infamous ones. So it's the
Okay.
kind of thing where like you do this once, but like
Not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But beside this sort of thing with the smuggling, the Free State of Bottleneck was doing plenty of things kind of like a real country. When they started running out of money, they just started printing their own currency.
Okay.
And then they would write funny little jokes on them because they wanted people to adopt the currency. So writing like the little silly sayings and jokes was a way to encourage people to keep this around because it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
And now this money is worth a ton
That's
online,
cool.
which is funny because they found a way to actually legitimize their currency.
Yeah.
People will pay real money for their money 100 years later.
That's funny.
And they also allegedly had plans to set up an embassy in Berlin. The people of the bottleneck, they considered themselves Germans, and they never really had problems with Berlin or the rest of the country. But just due to being geographically isolated, they did what they had to do, and they were willing to set up an embassy and have conduct those foreign relations, kind of like we talked about earlier. And I think a big chunk of what made the bottleneck such an oddity was Mayor Panischek himself. This guy definitely had a way with words. He's very poetic whenever he talks about the bottleneck. And another funny thing that he would do is he would give out fancy titles to anyone who helped out. So, for example, if you're a merchant who lives in Limburg and agrees to trade food with us, you're now our minister of food.
Nice.
Or if you found like an old train in like in a rail yard that's still functioning that we could use, well, you're our minister of railways.
Nice.
Which is a kind of a fun way to get people to
Yeah.
go along with your thing. And what I've read is that like he is definitely just being silly. Like he's not being serious about it.
Right.
He's just like a goofball. And I think it's proof that the leaders of real micronations may be as silly as the guys who go to Microcon. So in the summer of 1920, trade finally opens back up between the Free State of Bottleneck and the occupied territories. And this effectively ends the whole need for the bottleneck itself. So in some ways it kind of dissolved then. And then in 1923, because the Germans still hadn't paid enough reparations to the Allies for the war, the French ended up occupying a larger part of Germany that included that former region of the Free State of Bottleneck. So in some ways, they were always trying to resist occupation, and
Right.
it did inevitably come for them, but they at least had a bit of a reprieve over the years,
Right.
and they were able to resist for more than most places probably
Sure.
could. But don't worry. The bottleneck sort of lives on today as a marketing campaign.
Okay.
So Amy and I were backpacking the Rheinsteig Trail back in October, And we spent a day within the historical borders of the Free State of Bottleneck.
Nice.
There's now this alliance of local businesses in town that bear the name, and they made their own little seal for the country. It's like a lion, like drinking a glass of wine.
Okay.
And I know places like Columbus have similar things where we have like coffee trails and ale trails where like you get a little booklet and like a passport, and you stamp the passport when you go to the different businesses.
Right.
So they have this in the Free State of Bottleneck now, where like if you go to participating like businesses and restaurants, you can buy like a little fake passport, and then they can get that stamped. And we did not buy the passport itself, but we did stay at a hotel that was part of it.
Okay.
And as you're walking through the various towns of like Kaub and Lorsch that were part of the Bottleneck, you do just see those Freistaat Flaschenhals signs everywhere. And I thought like, oh, that's pretty cool. And one thing that we did buy, though, is I went to their tourism board office, and in 2019, they created a graphic novel about the Free State of Bottleneck.
Okay.
So I bought it. I'm showing Chris here what this looks like.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, so this is like this was a labor of love. This was not just like a quick churn and burn kind of thing.
No, this is beautiful.
It was released in 2019 on the 100-year anniversary of the Free State of Bottleneck.
Cool.
And it's kind of like a fictionalized version of what happened. Definitely like historical fiction based on a lot of the fact. I did research outside of the book, but it does, they try to hit a lot of the major points and things, like the train robberies in there, and there's some fun celebratory moments, but there's also like a lot of hardship, a lot of really sad and dark stuff in here. And I'm glad that they don't shy away from that.
Yeah.
And really, I feel like they focus on like the characters of the types of people who would have lived through that. And it kind of makes you kind of get into the mindset of like, well, what would it have been like if I lived through something like that? And this kind of goes into my moral of the story today, which is to support your local community. I feel like when times are difficult, people are faced with the question of how am I going to survive?
Yeah.
And I think everyone has different ideas on how they would go about that. And by all accounts, the Free State of Bottleneck actually kind of did a good job of surviving.
Yeah.
So during that time of the Bottleneck, the French were purposely running a propaganda campaign that was trying to say, the Free State of Bottleneck's a bad government. You're all going to starve. You would be better off joining the occupied area. Like trying to essentially like delegitimize their government. And basically, Mayor Panischek, President Panischek, I suppose, he immediately gets to action. So he starts building roads through the mountain that had no roads. Like here's an improvised temporary road, so now we know how to travel through there. He reestablishes telegraph lines that go around the French forces, so that way they can't get recut. And he also starts running a mail delivery service through the mountain on the horse-drawn carriages. Okay. And then he even organizes a lot of the food and coal smuggling that happens. This isn't like a completely guerrilla effort that's unorganized. Like he's the one making sure that this happens. And some people debate that the Free State of Bottleneck was arguably the first German territory to get rid of food rations after the war. That despite them having basically no natural resources that they could use for food, they somehow got so much food that they were doing okay.
Wow.
So in some ways, this scrappy little community did a better job than either the French government or the German government at the time. Wow. And I think part of why our joke micronations exist is because people like to roleplay a better version of government than they currently have. And it also allows people to feel like they can make an impact in their small community. Like being a citizen of a micronation allows you to share your ideas with your like-minded weirdos. And I'm not recommending that you go out and declare your independence, obviously, but instead I recommend to just kind of establish a support network and share your abundance with others around you. And while I might not live through a troubling time like the people did of the Bottleneck after World War I did have friends in my community offer me toilet paper during the early days of COVID when I was almost out of toilet paper at home, and we would go to the store and every shelf would be empty. And I remember saying to our friends, hey, we might actually run out. And we immediately had friends that said, don't worry, we have plenty of rolls. We'll get these to you. And we were eventually able to find some. And then I also reinstalled my bidet to help cut down on our
Nice.
usage a little bit.
Yes.
So I took some easy measures to combat against it, and the crisis was averted, obviously. But the point is that as much of a joke as that sounds, like that is kind of the community that I'm recommending that you try to look for in your life, of like people who have a surplus of a thing and are willing to give it out to other people in need. And now I try to have this mentality with others too. Like when someone we know is in a pinch, I try to say, how can we help them out? And, you know, I'll give you some of my sheep, even though you don't have any ore. And
Nice.
this is probably why I've never won a game of Settlers of Catan. Thank you for listening to the Factoid Podcast. If you have a factoid that you want to share with us, send us an email at what'syours@factoidpodcast.com.
You can find us everywhere you get your podcasts or on our website, factoidpodcast.com. Don't forget to tell your friends.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.